O'clock news now on BBC One with Michael Buerk.
Gordon Brown's put up interest rates for the first and last time. He's given the job to the Bank of England, the most radical economic reform since the war, says Labour. Confusion as two more contenders join the race to lead the beaten Tories. And the accountants have come up with an old solution for the new problems of struggling football clubs. Good evening. The Chancellor, Gordon Brown, raised interest rates by 1/4% today. The big mortgage lenders followed suit and put up the cost of home loans. That much was expected. What followed was not. Mr. Brown said he was giving the Bank of England responsibility for setting interest rates in future. He said it was the most radical reform in the bank's 300-year history. Our economics editor Peter Jay reports.
The Governor of the Bank was at the Treasury early this morning for a final meeting with the new Chancellor before his press conference. Mr. Brown had much more to announce than just the expected small interest rate rise.
I have therefore decided to give the Bank of England operational responsibility for setting interest rates with immediate effect.
Afterwards, I asked him whether Labour had been given a landslide majority so that it could immediately abdicate its main economic weapon.
I want to set in place a long-term framework for economic prosperity. I want to give businesses and families the confidence to plan ahead. I want to break from the stop-go, the boom-bust economics of previous years. And I believe that the decisions I have made are a better guarantee for stability. They will be widely welcome and they will give credibility and confidence to the monetary policy-making decisions of this country.
Financial crisis in the city, which didn't trust the policies of previous Labour governments, plagued their leaders.
That doesn't mean, of course, that the pound here in Britain, in your pocket or purse or in your bank, has been devalued.
Gordon Brown is determined to avoid the fate of his predecessors and believes that if monetary policy is seen to be in the hands of city experts, the markets will have confidence in Labour's policies. From next month, decisions about interest rates will be made by a new Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England. The Governor will head it and be accompanied by 3 current bank officials, the Deputy Governor, Howard Davies, and 2 directors, Mervyn King and Ian Plenderleith. They will be joined by an additional Deputy Governor and 4 other new members, all 5 to be appointed by the Chancellor. A simple majority will decide. The Chancellor himself was careful to scotch suggestions that he was giving the bank independence so that Britain would qualify for the European single currency.
No, it's the right decision for Britain, for British domestic needs, and it is a British solution to the challenges that we face. And I've also said on other occasions that, of course, I believe it is highly unlikely that we'll enter a single currency in 1999, although it is right, in my view, to keep the option open.
The Governor of the Bank of England was told of the plans for the bank's operational independence over the weekend on the basis of a letter setting out Labour's plan, which Gordon Brown carried with him into the Treasury on Friday. After suggested modifications of Labour's plan were rejected, the Governor accepted it in full.
I think that people will be persuaded that we're really serious about inflation now. The credibility will improve, and that will actually reduce the cost of achieving low inflation, and that will be good for the economy.
It was during the Chancellor's pre-election visit to Washington when he met the man who is now his American opposite number, Treasury Secretary Robert Rubin, that he reached his historic decision to hand back the control of the Bank of England. The Chancellor has certainly taken the bull by the horns, or at least handed the red rag to the Bank of England. In giving control of interest rates back to the Bank of England, Gordon Brown has drawn a line under 50 years of economic policy based on governments steering the economy between the evils of inflation and unemployment. Whether the Bank of England will do a better job, and who will get the blame if they don't, will be the key questions politically and economically of the period ahead. Peter Jay, BBC News, Downing Street.
The 2 biggest mortgage lenders, the Halifax and the Abbey National, moved quickly to raise borrowing rates. Other lenders are expected to follow, but there'll also be better rates for savers. In the city, the pound rose and shares ended the day at another record high, as our business correspondent Tessa Curtis reports.
Tomorrow's papers went to press with the major banks advertising their own higher lending rates. But with an independent Bank of England, the former Chancellor warns of more to come.
If you have an independent Bank of England suddenly plunge into this responsibility, you're going to have higher interest rates than you otherwise would have had. If it had been like that in my time, you would have had higher interest rates than I ever took them to, and you would have sacrificed some of the growth, some of the jobs, some of the prosperity that the trading sector of the British economy creates.
Higher interest rates come in response to rising consumer confidence and a boom in the housing market. As the day wore on, high street lenders raised the cost of borrowing, adding some £16 a month to a £60,000 mortgage. It may not be enough to dampen enthusiasm.
That sort of an increase isn't going to affect the housing market recovery. And if there were further increases needed later in the year for whatever reason, then again, if they are modest and staged properly, it shouldn't have an impact on borrowers.
The stock market, which has already defied expectations of a fall on the back of Labour's victory, liked today's changes and pushed the FTSE share index to another all-time high. But exporters were dismayed. Sterling, which has climbed steeply in recent months, reached its highest level for 4.5 years. It led to fresh calls from business groups for taxes to rise instead of interest rates to slow the economy.
The problem with interest rate increases is that it pushes up the value of the pound, and that makes our exports more expensive. We would rather see the government take a different approach and to look in the forthcoming budget at the possibility of personal tax increases to offset any future interest rate increases.
The new government has promised to create jobs, but a strong pound could force many companies to shed them. It's a problem on which Labour's fortunes may depend. This rise in interest rates had been widely expected from a new government keen to be tough on the economy. But if anything, it's made the bigger problem of sterling's strength still more pressing. Tessa Curtis, BBC News, West London.
The new government suffered its first ministerial resignation only 4 days after taking office. The former Chief Whip, Derek Foster, accepted a middle-ranking position in the Public Service Department at the weekend. But today he told Mr Blair he'd be better employed elsewhere and is expected to stand for Deputy Speaker in the Commons. Two more former Cabinet Ministers have officially entered the Conservative Party leadership contest, Michael Howard and John Redwood. Another, William Hague, is likely to join the race tomorrow after rejecting a secret deal with Mr Howard, which would have seen him named as Mr Howard's deputy. Kenneth Clarke and Peter Lilly have already declared their candidacies. Here's our political editor, Robin Oakley.
Former Home Secretary Michael Howard, a right-wing Eurosceptic who stayed loyal to John Major, made his bid for the Tory top job today. He argued that he valued every strand of Conservative thought and opinion, and that his record on law and order issues qualified him to lead the party.
I have a clear sense of purpose. I have developed and driven forward imaginative, popular and successful policies. I will lead a united party from the front.
But his launch was clouded by the deal which he thought he'd concluded with former Welsh Secretary William Hague to pull out and be his deputy and party chairman. Mr Hague will now run in his own right.
An agreement was reached with Mr Hague. He had second thoughts. He was perfectly entitled to have second thoughts.
Together, Mr Hague, much the youngest of the would-be leaders, and Mr Howard, one of the Tories' fiercest debaters, would have been a powerful combination. Last night at Mr Howard's official residence, being vacated today, they'd agreed the joint ticket and drunk champagne. A joint press conference had been arranged, but early this morning Mr Hague telephoned to say the deal was off. His supporters defended their man, who'll announce his own candidacy tomorrow.
I suppose it's quite flattering to see that Michael Howard recognises the leadership qualities of William Hague, that he's offered him that position. But William, quite rightly, spoke to Michael Howard this morning and rejected that deal. And I'm delighted because there are a number of members of Parliament who are now getting behind the William Hague campaign.
Today's other declaration came from the man who challenged John Major for the leadership 2 years ago. Insisting passionately how hard he'd fought to help win the election for his party, John Redwood claimed a unique selling point over his rivals.
Against Tony Blair across the dispatch box, I do not have to defend every last deed of the 92 to 97 government and can look to the future, whereas the others will have to explain why they stayed there, defending all those policies to the bitter end.
He argued the Tories could rebuild through local government, and he insisted that while his previous campaign might have been heavily Eurosceptical, he too didn't want a factional party.
I believe the Conservative Party is a broad church. It must stay as a broad church. The problem is we don't have enough worshippers at the moment. And so what we've got to do is go out and find a lot more worshippers, and you won't do that by only having one issue or one theme.
All the would-be candidates say they're best placed to build party unity. All claim the best credentials for tackling Tony Blair. But none has a specific answer to the Tories' splits on Europe. And they all know that they're committing themselves, if chosen, to what could be a very long haul to get the Tories back in contention. Robin Oakley, BBC News, Westminster.
President Mobutu of Zaire is